Hi, welcome back to my channel. I am the Black Carnivore, otherwise known as A-Day, and I'm really excited to bring this interview to you tonight. That's with Craig Emmerich, who is the author, along with his wife, of, I think, 18 books on keto and carnivore, and they're a longtime advocates in the space and really just have a ton of knowledge and a ton of experience, and I'm really excited to bring Craig to you tonight. His story is really fascinating, and I hope will be of interest to many of you. And so I am actually premiering this. It was pre-recorded, but I'm premiering it tonight. And then afterwards, Arian and I are going to jump on and do a live stream so we can all discuss it. But we'll be live in the chat. So when you watch this, I'll be in the chat with you. And then right after, just come on back to my channel and there'll be a new live that pops up and you'll be able to join us then. And we'll be able to talk about it in real time. So I'm really excited and I will see you soon. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Black Carnivore podcast, and I am really excited to share this guest today. Craig Emmerich is a very famous author within the keto and carnivore realm, and he and his wife Maria have built an incredible empire of with tons of information for people who want to follow a keto or carnivore way of life. And he has a tremendous amount of research and information, and we're just going to talk today about his story, how he came to keto, then carnivore, and and what advice he has for us. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hi, Craig.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would love to hear, just to start, like, how did you get into keto, and then how did you transition into carnivore? What was that about?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story. I'll try to shorten it as much as I can. Maria, when I met her, she was struggling with a lot of issues like IBS and acid reflux and PCOS, and she had extra weight that she didn't want. And so all these issues that she was having issues with, she was following all the traditional guidelines, low fat, healthy whole grains, all this stuff, and none of it worked. She was even running marathons and still couldn't get the extra weight off, still had these issues. And so she thought there's got to be a better way. And she went into college and went into nutrition and exercise science. All the nutrition stuff was pretty much same food pyramid stuff. She's like, this isn't working. There's got to be something, right? Kind of a light bulb moment for her at the time is we had a golden retriever dog that was her pet, and took it in. She was having patches of her hair falling out. Took her into the vet, and the very first thing they asked was, "What are you feeding her?" And yet she went for some of her same issues to the doctor, never asked what she was eating. It was, well, we can prescribe this for your, this, and prescribe this for this. So that was kind of a light bulb moment for her that, there's got to be a better solution out here. And she started researching on her own. And, that's about 20 years ago now. And she just found a lot of papers, a lot of books talking about low carb. She started doing it. She started to see results. She reversed all of her issues and, lost the extra weight, even though she stopped running marathons because it was hard on her joints. And so, everybody's asking, how do you do this? What did you do? You look great. You're having such great results. And so she started helping people, and then eventually started writing her first book when we started our adoption, because we wanted to help fund the adoption in some way. We adopted 2 boys from Ethiopia in very expensive adoption costs at the time. And so we somebody suggested, you have all these great recipes and great advice. Why don't you start writing a book and maybe use that to help fund? And that was how she got into writing books. And,
Wow.
18 probably total books since, here we are. But, myself, it took me a little longer to come along because I didn't have at the time any real health issues. And, when you don't have IBS and all these constant issues, it's not as, such a priority. And I only had maybe 30 pounds, maybe 40 pounds of extra weight. And so I didn't really worry too much about it. But once I started eating what she made me during the week, weekends I'd eat whatever, go out to restaurants and have fries and everything. About 15, 16 years ago, I just noticed how bad I felt on the weekends. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to feel like this anymore. And I switched over and been keto ever since. Carnivore came along more recently, and we were always a protein first kind of keto. So we're always, make sure you get enough protein, focus on eating protein for 10, 12 years ago. She coined a pure protein day as a way to help with weight loss or break a stall. Well, that's really
I
essentially,
remember that from the Dukan diet, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And what we just didn't know that, carnivore or protein sparing modified fast was really what she was talking about at the time.
Right.
We just knew it worked, prioritizing protein. But myself, about 9 years ago, I started having back pain and issues with constant pain. And after 7, 8 years of struggling with this pain, I finally, and getting more and more pain moving up my back into my neck, less mobility, lots of issues. I realized there's something wrong here, that I have to figure this out. And I think because I was keto at the time, it helped me manage it for so long. But about 2.5 years ago, then I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, and that's what was causing it. A lot of our clients that have Lyme, we say go keto, and even better carnivore. By the time I didn't know any of this. I was just eating keto, and it was probably managing the pain enough. So it was a blessing and a curse in that I let it go so long before I finally figured it out. So it got real chronic, and with Lyme disease, the more chronic it gets, the longer more and more issues. It breaks down your immune system, and you get heavy metal issues. And we could do an entire episode on Lyme. But about 3 years ago, I said, when I was diagnosed, I knew that there's people in the carnivore community like Charlene Anderson who have used carnivore for 20 years to manage her Lyme. I said, well, I'm hardly eating any plants the way it is. Why don't I go full carnivore and see how it works? And it helped my pain tremendously. So ever
Wow.
since, I stuck with the pretty strict carnivore. The one thing with me is, and this we could probably get into, you have different levels of carnivore, right? And it really depends on your goals. And that's why in our carnivore book, the first thing we said is, what's your why? Like, why are you doing carnivore? And that can really change how you do it. And for me, my why was chronic Lyme. And in my case, even if I add a little too much plants, like we went out and got burgers from a restaurant, and they were nice burgers. I tolerate dairy pretty well. Had dairy on it, but it had some like cabbage for like what do you call, coleslaw kind of thing on it. And I decided to eat it, and my joint pain flared up that day just from that little bit of on there. So for me, it's immediate feedback that I need to stay more strict with carnivore.
Wow. So, what do you think is a mechanism that allows it to, beat your chronic pain?
Yeah, for me, obviously, it's a speculation. I don't know this, and there's no studies on this, but I think what happens is, Lyme disease, when it gets chronic, you have this chronically depressed immune function, and because of constant inflammation from the Lyme. To prove that point, when I figured out what was wrong with me, I got the standard Western blot Lyme test about a year before that. In the standard Western blot, which you ask Lyme literate doctors today, up to 70% false negatives. They'll say you don't have Lyme when you really do, especially in these chronic conditions. It said no. So I was like, oh, I don't have Lyme. A year later, it's still getting worse. I'm like, I got to figure this out. Went into a functional medicine doctor and said, I know a lot about nutrition and what's going on in the human body. Give me all these tests. I gave her a battery of tests I wanted to have done. One of them was, everything was fairly good. CRP, C-reactive protein, which is an inflammation marker, was 50. And you typically want it
Wow.
below 2, or ideally below 1. And I had been eating very low inflammation foods, keto, protein priority, all of that, and I had a
Right.
50. And I'm like, wow,
Wow.
something's wrong here. And then at the same time, our publishers, who also had issues with Lyme and battled it, said, I think you have Lyme. You just got to get the right test. And there's this IGeneX Lyme test, which is a much better test. That came back positive for Lyme.
Wow. So, does carnivore cure it, or this is just a way to
Yeah,
manage
sorry.
it?
Finish my point. Yeah. So I came back with positive for Lyme disease, and chronic Lyme disease. What it happens is it depresses the whole immune function, and so all of these other issues that your body can normally detox and deal with build up in the body. One's heavy metals. Body can detox heavy metals in a normal functioning immune system and state. What happens with chronic Lyme patients? You got that depressed immune function, and so the heavy metals build up in the body. The test that I got done for mercury, she said it was the highest mercury she's ever seen. I had all my fillings, I had all my old fillings taken out and replaced. I had a cavitation surgery where you get infections in like root canals and wisdom teeth that have been pulled. So they opened up my jaw and cleaned up all the infection in there. And so, you got all this stuff that builds up and becomes, that's why you get these range of symptoms and problems. I believe that plants and the anti-nutrients in them, which a normal functioning immune system, a person without metabolic issues is going to detox those anti-nutrients. Anti-nutrients are something the body doesn't want. And so it's got to detox them through the detoxification pathways. And when you've already got this, Lyme, chronically depressed, it just can't, it's already taxed and dealing with all this detoxing. And so it adds an extra load that the body just can't handle, causing inflammation and flare-ups and stuff like that. That's my belief on why that is.
Wow. So that sounds really difficult to struggle with. I'm sorry. But it seems like you're at least feeling a lot better and operating a lot better through the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anybody that knows about chronic Lyme it can be a range of issues, and it can actually get very neurological in some cases, where you get brain fog, you can't focus, all of these kind of things. I was lucky enough to never have that. I think, again, my theory, I think that being keto the whole time I had Lyme helped prevent it from getting, neurological. That's what I think. But the pain is bad. I mean, my mobility is still way down. I've tried, this summer, I've clawed my way back to getting enough reduced pain with carnivore and my lifestyle to start lifting weights again and start to try to regain strength. And one of the things, the other thing on my blood panel that was off was my red blood cell count. Hemoglobin was low, even though I ate tons of iron and red meat and all this stuff. Well, one of the co-infections of Lyme is Babesia, and I had that, and it attacks red blood cells. So you get anemic. So you have low energy, you lose muscle. I lost, right around the time I was diagnosed, I was always about 150 pounds, and I just suddenly dropped 20 pounds of muscle. I mean, I didn't have much fat to lose. And within 6 months, I went down 20 pounds. I was 130 pounds, and I was just lost a ton of muscle. So I'm gotten back to where I've got enough of the pain reduced that I can start lifting weights again, which is great. I still can't do lower body stuff like squats, because one of the things with a Lyme is you can get migrating pain. It's where I got the back pain and stuff. That's where it started. But migrating pain starts to show up with chronic Lyme, where you get pain in a knee. So I wake up in the morning and it feels like my right knee is sprained, and I didn't do anything. It just feels like it's sprained. It's hard to walk. The next morning, it's in the other knee or the hip or the ankle.
Wow.
And it just moves around, and it's one of the effects of, I've had mold issues because of Lyme, but also Lyme. They can both have those type of symptoms. When I'm strict carnivore, it's very much reduced. But even with that, I still am not to a point where I can do squats and not have a lot of pain flare up. But gotcha. I'm working my way back.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Well, I feel confident, and I definitely wish you the best. I'm also curious that, I mean, this is not exactly a keto or carnivore question, but like, you operate as a family. Like, I feel like there are so few like husbands and wives who work together and make that all work. And so it's always delightful, for me to see how you work together and how you bring in your boys as well. And, how I don't know if you don't mind, like, how is that family dynamic working together? How do you guys split up work? You're both
Yeah.
authors of the books. Like, who's writing what? Who does the research? What's that like?
Yeah, no, it's an amazing partnership, truly. I mean, we have such complementary skills that work so good in this space. I think it's really is quite unique. My background is in electrical engineering, so I worked for 12 years as an engineer and then a product manager in eventually into healthcare space. I was actually doing working. I was a product manager for a software company that did like calcium scoring and CT scans and stuff. That was one of my last jobs in the engineering world. So I have that technical background, and that's where I started, was just in the background, kind of helping her with her blog and all. I'd set up the websites and do all taxes, kind of business back end of it. Let her focus on recipe development and photographs and all that. But as it evolved, I don't know, 12 years ago, I just stepped back from engineering and said, let's focus on your business because it's doing well, and this is where we have our passion, and we want to help people. And that was the best decision I ever made, because I then started researching myself, and with an engineering mindset that, in engineering, especially electrical engineering, chip development and stuff advances so fast that if you're not keeping up on the latest technology and information, 6 months you're obsolete. And so, in this space, I kind of try to do the same thing. I'm always learning. I'm always reading. So for past 12 years, I've been doing that, and being more technical, I kind of get the science deeper into the science side of things. And then Maria is obviously amazing with recipe development and photography and all of that. So it's a really good complement.
Yeah. I totally see that. I'm actually really curious from what you just said. Like, you have been in this space for a really long time. And I know, like, the first time I picked up an Atkins book was like the late 90s. And that was like the first time I did low carb or became, aware of it at all. But I think back then I was actually, pretty interested in it. And it's like, what is this diet? Why does it work? How does this work? And this is so different. So I did do, quite a bit of research. And, well, back then, the internet isn't what it was today. So, there were like a few of these kind of online forums, and I'd find like, different listservs and stuff for people who follow different diets. And so I listened to a lot of people's experiences, but, thinking back to what I was told to do in the 90s to kind of deal with side effects and other stuff versus what we know today, I mean, there was just like a world of difference. So tell me, how has like our knowledge and our understanding of how we do the keto and then a carnivore diet has evolved? What have you seen? What do you find interesting? And what do you predict for 2030?
Oh man. Yeah, that's, myself, I think my first exposure was Atkins in like 95 or something. I wanted to lose some weight after college, and did Atkins for a while. So that was probably my first exposure to low carb. Didn't stick with it. And then later met Maria, and that, snowball happened. You know, it's interesting. I think it is evolving and changing with time. There's concepts and things. If you go back, I think there's a fair amount of people that will say keto's not Atkins, and that's different. In reality, if you go back to the original Atkins, in the 70s, not what it turned into with these processed foods and Atkins bars and all this crap. If you go back to his original principles, initial in phase one, had a lot of things right. Prioritizing protein, cutting carbs way down, it got a lot right. I think we kind of keto, as it got popular in the last three to 5 years, some kind of principles that aren't really great for health long term and for weight loss and stuff got into the mainstream that shouldn't be there. Things like, you need to eat at least 200 grams of fat a day to be keto or lose fat. You have to, eat at least 70 or 80% of your calories from fat to be keto, and this kind of stuff. And it's frustrating for us. And this is why we have put so much out there as far as books and information and blogs about this is because we don't want people to have their first experience with keto be that. And they're like,
Right.
gosh, I can't drink another bulletproof coffee. It's driving me, and we're like, don't do that, especially if fat loss is your goal. Fat is a lever. It's a tool. And, obviously there's situations where you want higher dietary fat, but again, what's your why? The higher dietary fat originated in 1908 or something in near my hometown in Minnesota for seizure control. And if you're trying to control seizures, if you have Alzheimer's, there's certain neurological conditions where a higher dietary fat is going to be beneficial. But that isn't mainstream keto or weight loss keto, and that's what's happened in the last 3 to 5 years. It's these people that are jumping on the bandwagon are kind of spreading this misinformation, or fear protein because it's going to turn into chocolate cake in your arteries, and those kind of myths get perpetuated, and so we've been fighting hard to fight those myths. I do think one other thing that I would point out is that one of the first books Maria got into was Gary Taubes, and Gary Taubes had tons of great information and a lot of good information in that direction. The one area I would, now knowing what I know now about science and biology, differ slightly in is that it's all about insulin. I don't think it's all about insulin. I think that it's a key component, but what happens today is you get a lot of people fearing any increase in insulin. Well, you need insulin. You need insulin to survive. Transient insulin, where it goes up after a meal, is completely normal, as long as it's not a huge spike, right? And
Right.
So, protein, for example, you need insulin to use protein. You need insulin to make lean mass, or over time you die if you didn't get the transient spike of insulin for protein. And on top of that, if it was only about insulin, then you'd never be able to gain weight eating keto or carnivore. And we know that's not true, right? You eat enough fat, you eat enough food, you can gain weight even with zero carbs, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, again, so it's kind of the evolution. We had early Atkins that got a lot right, Taubes that got a lot right, but maybe not. It's not all about insulin. So I think it's evolved through time, and I think we're kind of getting into this place where what we find works best is kind of our model, or people like Keto Gains or Dr. Ted Neiman, where you prioritize protein and you get at least enough for your lean mass. So that's very important, because your body's turning over lean mass all the time. Skin, how much skin you lose each day, all this protein that needs to be replaced. So you got to get enough of that. Then carbs you want low, because you don't want, there's no essential carbohydrates, and you don't want to be spiking massive spikes in your insulin. And then you got fat. So fat's kind of the only thing left to vary. So you vary it based on your goal. If it's maintenance, up the fat a bit. If it's fat loss, lower it a little bit and adjust it to based on your goals. I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah. So in 2030, what do you think the space will look like? What do you think we'll be talking about? What do you think will be ubiquitous knowledge versus, I don't know, myth and hype?
Healthcare space moves at a glacial speed. I mean, it's so hard to get healthcare professionals as a whole to start grasping these kind of new concepts. It's interesting in engineering, you are taught to question everything. Even if it's the top engineer at your company, if you've got a concept that maybe goes against what he's saying, you're encouraged to speak up. Where in healthcare, I think it's the opposite. It's like, how dare you question, the lipid expert, that kind of, mentality. And that's, I think, why there's a lot of engineers that are coming to this space. People like myself, people like Ted Neiman, people like Tyler Cartwright and Dave Feldman, Ivor Cummins. They're all engineers that are now in this space because they're questioning everything. And, I think, and in looking for root causes versus, Band-Aids on health solutions. So I think that is hopefully where things are going, is that more root cause I see it in some spaces, like the Journal of Cardiology, I think recently just put out a thing saying maybe we need to reconsider our, limitations on saturated fat, because saturated fat doesn't lead to issues. I mean, that seems basic. Like in this space, it's like, well, yeah, saturated fat is not this problem, but to get them to acknowledge it in an article that they posted, it's a baby step, right? It's getting in the right direction. I think in 10 years, at least as a minimum, I would love to see for diabetes management, this being a standard, if not preferred protocol, going low carb across the healthcare space. I mean, that would be my hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of hoping that the changes that we'll see will bubble up from the bottom up, right? So I feel like we still get magazine articles saying low carb or keto is like the most unhealthy thing that you can do, and it's dangerous and it'll kill you. Yet it is the most popular diet on earth. So it's like, why? Wait, how is this happening? And and I would think that magazines would just be more responsive to what people are actually doing. So it's sort of weird that there is this disconnect, and you have, that kind of messaging, conflicting messaging happening. But as more people just do it and see that it works, then that itself is like the most powerful convincer, I hope.
Yeah, I think it is a kind of a grassroots movement in that's where it started. 15 years ago when Maria was helping clients with this, nobody knew about it, but we grew because of word of mouth. And how did you lose all this weight? You look great. You've got all this energy. What are you doing? And so it was all like in the history of our company that we've developed, we've never paid for a dollar of advertising, not one. It's always been word of mouth. It's always been, that kind of grassroots movement to people trying to feel healthy. And I think the reason it has staying power is because for the vast majority of our clients, they stick with keto not because of the weight they lost. They stick with it because of how they feel. They feel so amazing. And that's why I switched over, because I felt so good when I was eating this way. When I was at work, I didn't have that afternoon slump where I would like want to take a nap at my desk, and my mental clarity went through the roof. I could hyper focus on projects for 8 hours straight. Like I love that feeling, and so people stick with it because of how they feel, not because of a quick fix weight loss kind of thing. And I think that's why it gains that kind of grassroots.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that sort of problem-solving approach or questioning approach that you have as a scientist. So that's that's really helpful to have that here. So how many? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's for myself, I came into it looking at it just like an engineer, where if I've got a computer chip and my outputs are wrong, the very first thing I'm going to do is look at my inputs and say, were my inputs right? And if they're not, then I got to fix the inputs. That's the first step, right? So a human body is just a machine that's, I believe, generally is going to do what it's supposed to do. We in healthcare, I think we've got this kind of misconception that those are just your genetics. Those are just the cards you're dealt. Like Maria, she went in with PCOS. The only solution they had for her was, you're just going to have to live with it. These are the cards you're dealt. And I'm going to say, yes, there are genetic predispositions for certain things, but it doesn't mean you're going to get that no matter what you do. If you get the right inputs to your body can do the right things it needs to do. And so if you've got, metabolic disorders, diabetes, all these, cancer, all these problems, go back to the root causes and fix those. And your body will fix the problem generally, in most cases. And that includes obviously diet, huge input, but also sleep. Make sure you get enough sleep. Make sure you get enough sunlight and vitamin D. Very important. Make sure you're, exercising. These are all inputs. Don't smoke. Those are bad inputs, right?
Yeah.
So get the inputs right, and generally the body's going to do what it's supposed to do. Fix the output.
Yeah. So I actually think that's really, really important. And I was thinking about how to, start building a message that sort of broadens, because I think people get so focused on food specifically, specific foods, like, even down to brands, and maybe they talk about calories, but not thinking about what their world looks like overall. And I'll talk to people who are struggling to like lose weight or get healthier. And then, I find out they sleep, maybe 3 or 4 hours a night. And it's like, I don't know what you can do. Like if that's the level of sleep, like that's it. You have to deal with that before anything else.
There was a really interesting study done on Army Ranger soldiers. They looked at their level of like insulin resistance and insulin and glucose levels and all that when they're eating or when they were sleeping 8 hours, and then they changed nothing except they forced them to only sleep 4 hours every night. And within like 2 weeks, their signs of insulin resistance doubled. Just
Wow.
getting 4 hours of sleep versus 8 hours. Your body needs sleep so much, and so many people. I mean, we get this all the time. We'll ask people, how many hours, or do you get good sleep? Oh yeah, I sleep great. I sleep awesome. Okay, how many hours? Oh, 5, maybe 6. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's not enough.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need sleep, and it when you don't get enough sleep, especially if fat loss is one of your goals, you're gonna have so much more hunger that next day. I notice it myself. If I get one night of poor sleep, maybe only get 6 hours for some reason, I am so hungry the next day. I could eat everything. It's such a driver of hormones that sleep is a very important piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I know so many people too who struggle with insomnia, and I'm, so grateful, knock on wood, that, I've never really had that problem. For me, staying awake is more the problem. But going keto and carnivore has actually given me a ton of energy. So like, I don't have that afternoon slump like you talked about. And at least I had the presence of mind as a younger adult to know that if I ate pancakes for lunch, that I was going to be like taking a nap by 2:30. So, I made better choices at lunch, but still, I would still have that dip. And now in retrospect, I know it's just, it was the carbs wearing off, and that, that was it. Yeah. And I used to, when I worked in an office, I had a little circuit that I would take because I knew all the people in the building who kept chocolate on their desk. So I would have a circuit that I took every day, and I tried not to hit the same people every day. So, I had a couple of rounds that I would take, and it was, terrible.
Oh, I know. I did the same. There's always office goodies around that tempt you.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
it's in the cycle. It's such a dangerous one because that is what drives the hunger, is the fall in glucose, right? And again, this goes back to transient insulin by itself is not a problem. Really big transients is because if you go back to glucose, 85 milligrams per deciliter is the normal blood glucose. That's 4 grams of glucose in your entire blood volume of your entire body. That's 1 teaspoon of sugar. So 1 teaspoon in your entire blood volume, that's normal. So when you spike it with 30, 40, 50 grams of glucose in a Mountain Dew, that's foreign to the body. That's, 10 times what it wants in the blood. So it goes into panic mode. And when this insulin is going so high so you don't die from too much glucose in the blood, it overcompensates. And so that glucose falls way down and even gets, too low. Now you're ravenous again, even though you just ate 1,500 calorie lunch. 3 hours later, you're hungry again because the glucose has dipped.
Yeah.
So that's important about that component.
And I remember the first time I heard that we only have about a teaspoon of sugar in the whole blood volume. And I remember thinking, what? Then how are we supposed to eat candy and chocolate and soda? And then like that was the first time that it was like, oh, maybe like this is not for us. I mean, I knew that I needed to not eat those things to lose weight, but I didn't really think about, health. Like I figure if you're already slim, this is like, it's not a big deal. You don't even have to pay attention to this. But as, you're describing, for everyone, slim or not.
Yeah. Well, and with that, you could be slim and metabolically damaged as well. We get clients all the time, or not all the time, but occasionally, where they're 110, 120 pounds, and they're type 2 diabetics because they've hit their personal fat threshold. So everybody has a certain number of fat adipose tissue, fat cells, and we don't, for whatever reason, make a lot more and when we're older. And so if you start out with a lot of fat cells, you can get more obese before you get metabolically damaged. When you get what happens is the adipose cells, they fill up and they get bigger, and they get to a point where like, okay, that's it, I can't take anymore. Reject glucose or reject insulin because I don't want to store anymore in me because I'm going to blow up. I got to stay. So you get too many of those cells blown up, and now you're insulin resistant because there's no place to put the fat. There's no place to store that fuel. And so it builds up in the blood. You get triglycerides, you get, fat in the liver and pancreas, and that's, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. Well, that can happen if you've just got a few adipose and for whatever reason you don't make more. That's why you get somebody who's 110 pounds and it could be type 2 diabetic because they don't have many fat cells, but they're all inflamed. There's no place to put it anymore. But what I find interesting too, and I talked a little bit about this in our keto book, I look at the blood lines, or blood as like fuel lines, like in a car. You don't want too much fuel getting into the car and blowing up the engine, right? So it tightly manages how much fuel is in the blood all the time. And at any given moment at rest, like right now we're both sitting here, not active, there's about 30 total calories of fuel in the blood. You've got 4 grams of glucose, 16 calories. You've got free fatty acids and blood ketones, generally adds up to around maybe 30 calories. That's it. Now, that's, at any moment, what's in the blood, what's being released versus what's being, used as fuel. If you're exercising, obviously that goes up. But it points out that when you eat any meal, that's a pretty big flood of energy into the bloodstream, and the body's got to manage. And that's why concepts like oxidative priority, which we talked about in our book, are important because it's got to prioritize, how do I process all these fuels? And this is one of the reasons alcohol is so detrimental to fat loss, because its number one priority, you can't store it. So if alcohol is elevated in the blood and you eat a burger with fries and, a shake, you got a bunch of carbs and fat coming in. Well, alcohol is up. I got to deal with alcohol first. So it drives down fat and carbs into storage. So it's just like a storage, blunt when you have alcohol high. So, the body's got to manage all these fuels in the blood very tightly. So that can help you understand, why what I eat versus, what fuels are coming in and stored can help you with if fat loss is one of your goals.
Yeah. So that's interesting what you're saying. So us sitting here right now, we only have about 30 calories of energy floating around for use for this moment. Now, let's say suddenly a tiger appeared behind me, and I decided to jump up and run and, I don't know, jump out the window or whatever. Assuming that I don't have a 3-story drop to the ground. So in that moment, to make that decision and jump up and do that, I'm going to need way more calories, right? So how quickly is the body able to ramp up the energy, whatever energy you have access to?
Fairly quickly, but what's interesting about that is
fairly quickly is not comforting when there's a tiger right there.
The blood in that case, actually, it's. I think it's not as much about what gets dumped into the blood and then taken up by muscle, because what you need in that moment in a fight or flight kind of response is instant energy within the muscle, and that is what glycogen is for. And so actually, one of the things about glucose is we say you got maybe 1,500 calories of glucose storage in the body, most of that in muscle glycogen. And then maybe 60 grams of glucose in the liver glycogen. That liver glycogen is the only one that is accessible by the bloodstream. The glycogen in the muscle is locked in the muscle. It can't come back in the bloodstream, right? So what happens is, even with moderate exercise, if you go on a vigorous 2-mile walk, you're probably not tapping any of that muscle glycogen, because it's really only locked up for extreme activity, like bicycling 2 hours or running a sprint. That's when it gets tapped into. It's again that fight or flight. That's when you start tapping into that storage.
So that's not calorie or energy storage. That's like, I mean, regular. That's for emergency situations
Yeah.
when you need a lot. Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
that
and
makes
I
sense.
think Bullock and Finney have a few studies on this.
Hmm.
One of them, I would say, on the oxidation rates. If you're doing an extended exercise like a 2 hour intense bike ride or a marathon, your fat oxidation rates, again, this is delta. This is how much you're burning per hour kind of thing, not instantaneous, increase in the blood, go up by like tenfold in keto athletes. So you can get like a tenfold increase in fat oxidation rates,
Hmm.
burning fat in stores. Um, but yeah, mostly the fight or flight kind of stuff, like sprinting, that's the muscle glycogen that's locked in there. And another Volek and Finney study showed that the muscle glycogen replenishment is pretty constant, but the body's extremely good at making its own glucose to replenish its own glycogen storage because it's such an essential fight or flight thing. And they showed that these athletes completely depleted their glycogen by doing like 3 hour or 2.5 hour crazy intense bike riding. Then separated them two groups. One group added carbs after the workout, and one didn't. Within 24 hours, they biopsied the muscle, and the glycogen storage was basically the same for the ones
Huh.
that added no carbs after or the ones that did add carbs. And so that shows how powerful the body is at creating its own glucose to replenish those stores.
Wow. Okay. That's really, really helpful. And actually, I do have one more question. Maybe you
Yep.
know, can you ever get to a point where you can exceed um, your energy demand can exceed the amount of fat your body can oxidize at any given moment?
Yes, actually, there's something called fat flux that we talk about a little bit in our keto book, where you've always got this fat going in and out of your fat cells. And if you think of it from a lipid, and we got the conference that you were gracious enough to contribute to is still going on. We have one week left, and this weekend it's Dave Feldman, who's got some amazing information on cholesterol coming out. He talks about lipids as being this kind of transport of fat
Mm-hmm.
around the body, right? And so what happens
Mm-hmm.
is you have adipose tissue, your fat cells. Inside of there are triglyceride molecules, which are three free fatty acid molecules linked together by a glycerol backbone. That's your fat
Mm-hmm.
storage. When your body needs more fuel, especially when you're keto adapted and you're primarily burning fat, it cleaves off the glycerol, and that goes into circulation and goes to the liver, and three glycerols make a glucose molecule. So you get glucose from that. About energy wise, it's like 90% fat, 10% glucose in your fat storage. Um, the free fatty acids, now you got three of them, and they bind to albumin, which makes it go through the bloodstream, and it can be burned directly in your muscle. So actually, when you're keto, you're not really burning ketones as your primary fuel. You're burning free fatty acids directly from
Mm-hmm.
fat storage. But what happens is, for whatever reason, the body almost always puts out more fat than it needs at any given moment. Again, might be related to a fight or flight kind of thing, having extra ready. But what happens is then it goes to extra fat, goes to the liver, gets bound back into a triglyceride molecule and into a VLDL particle, back into fat storage. And that's kind of your fat flux cycle. You got fat coming out, some of it gets used, some doesn't, gets packaged back up, back into storage. And it's kind of always doing this cycling.
Mm-hmm.
Dietary fat will come in and it's packaged in a chylomicron, big old molecule of fat that then goes straight into storage. Some chylomicrons may get burned as fuel, but vast majority of dietary fat is going to go into storage at
Oh,
first.
I didn't. Okay, I didn't know that. So you're not actually necessarily even using the fat that you're eating. That's going into storage, and then this fat cycling is going on
Yeah,
constantly, which is coming out of your storage, not out of your daily diet. Okay, that's helpful.
yeah, and that's where in my presentation in our conference, I talked a fair amount about this. That dietary fat really only has three places it can go, right? So dietary fat is either going to go into the digestive system, get absorbed, and then it goes into the chylomicron. So it goes either burned as fuel, which is a small amount, or into storage, and part of the fat flux cycle now because it's going in. And the third path that it can go is out your digestive tract, right out of you. But when studies have shown, even in this one study where they varied the dietary fat from like 60 grams a day to like 180 grams of fat a day, the stool had a fairly constant amount of fat in it, like maybe 10 grams. It was less than 10 grams and didn't vary based on dietary fat intake. Okay, so very little is going out the digestive tract, and it's probably a good thing because you get too much fat in there and you will be rushing to the bathroom in a big hurry. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you remember the craze of Olestra chips back in the day, the Wow chips, because Wow, they had to put a warning on it that you might not be able to control your bowels because it was a fat that went through your digestive tract and didn't get absorbed.
Yeah, what do they call it? Anal leakage?
Yes, anal leakage.
There's a risk of anal leakage.
Yeah, that's what I want my snacks. So again, not much. It's constant, and so this, just a small amount going that way. So the rest goes into the bloodstream. Vast majority of it into storage, and then becomes part of the fat flux cycle. And we talk in our book about we want negative fat flux for fat loss, which means more fat coming out of the fat cells than going back in. And one of the leads to going in is dietary fat. One of the ways to get it out is to burn it in your muscle. And so while this isn't, calories in, calories out, it is a fat balance of, you got to balance the dietary fat based on your goals. And that will help you. Yeah.
So is there ever a chance where you would end up needing more fat than you can actually burn? Like, let's say you're fasting and you decide to run do an Ironman, so you're not even doing slow, easy exercise, but it's like, more intense exercise.
So I think for 99.999% of people, no, it's not really in that context, because there's I can share the articles with you, but there's a man who ran 100 miles fasted, and he was fairly lean. And so you have enough, and it wasn't record time, right? I mean, that's a different, but he ran 100 miles fasted with just water. So, that is, I think, an example of, even when you're very lean, you still have tens of thousands of calories in stored body fat that you can access. And so in that context, when you get to somebody like Zach Bitter, who we also had on our conference, world record holder for the 100 miles, you're looking for fuel. He probably eats almost carnivore. He eats primarily protein. In on the actual race, then he'll add, glucose and some fuels at a very set rate, just enough to, satisfy his needs for the race and keep his peak performance. Different world, everybody else, if you're not in his world, you don't need to add extra.
Yeah. So I just wonder, because I definitely see people sometimes I feel like they're pushing themselves a little bit too much. So, doing long extended fasts, doing heavy exercise. And I think, maybe something like walking or, even a slow jog. I mean, frankly, the human body is designed to do that. So that's in some ways like the least energy intense kind of activity that we might doing, but maybe deciding to play racquetball, I don't know, or tennis, for 2 hours at noon, that might end up being too much.
Yeah. Well, that's what we try to have people do, a balance. We discourage, if your primary goal again is fat loss and getting lean and body composition, we discourage doing like cardio queen kind of, constant cardio. I mean, it raises, doing excessive amounts can raise cortisol, and it raises hunger, which causes other issues, and can again, Maria was running marathons and her diet was wrong, of course, but it wasn't helping her because it just drives more hunger. Yeah. If you do a combination, that I think is where the key is, where you do some strength training, because lean mass is very important. Everybody wants to be strong when they age. They don't want to be frail and in a wheelchair. Lean mass is very important. So, strength training is a great component for anyone. And then some cardio is great as well. So, the combination of the two, I think, is ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's super helpful. Did you guys just get a puppy? I think I saw a post or something
Oh,
like that.
yeah. I hear her barking a little. Hopefully, it's not distracting you. But yeah, we got a little baby. She's about 6 pounds. She's a little fur ball. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a dog too. So I
Yeah.
no worries, not bothered at all. But it is nice to have a pet in the home, and
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. Well, this year with everything that's going on, we're kind of home a lot. We're like, why not? Our last puppy, we had a golden retriever, and she died about a year and a half ago, or well,
Hmm.
actually a year and a month. Uh, and we weren't thinking with our travels and stuff, we weren't thinking to get another one, but the boys really wanted one, and it's been a
Hmm.
great bonding experience for them. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
been great.
So is the dog carnivore too?
Yes, eats
Nice.
raw meat, bones and raw food. They call it the BARF diet, bad acronym,
Yeah.
but bones and raw food.
Yeah.
It's we feed her beef heart, beef liver, ground beef, steak trimming. Not so much fat, but more of a little bit of protein. She's 6 pounds, so she doesn't eat that much, so it makes it
Yeah.
pretty easy to do. But especially beef heart, beef heart you get for like $2 a pound. It's
Yeah.
when you eat high quality dog foods could probably going to be more than that per meal.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then supplement that with bones that you choose on all day.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So
Yeah,
it's
she
a whole
loves it.
carnivore. It's a whole carnivore family.
Well, yeah,
Are your
carnivore.
kids too? Are they more keto or do they do carnivore?
More keto. They one of the things they love is Maria's protein noodle lasagna, which if you want to talk about recipes, that's an awesome one for people
Yeah.
to try. It basically substitutes your noodle with meat, with like a shaved chicken breast or something. Most people say it's better than the traditional. Like it's really
Mm.
our boys love it. They eat a lot of that. But when we brought them home from Ethiopia about 9 years ago, um, they were barely registering on the growth charts, so they were like 2%. Yeah, at the orphanage, not great nutrition, so they were behind. We immediately just started feeding them what we ate. Like I remember pureeing beef for Kai at 16, 14 months or so. Just puree it into a paste, and he would eat it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
egg yolks, salmon. They love salmon. Pick it apart in little pieces. Um, just eating what we ate. And within a year, they were 50% on the growth charts.
Mm.
And 2 years, they've been at 75 and stayed there. And this is kind of,
Excellent.
one of the myths on kids is, oh, keto's bad for kids because it stunts their growth. Well, that study was done in children with epilepsy. So number one, they don't have a normal, they've got metabolic issues going on to begin with. But number two is they did a therapeutic ketogenic diet, which was like 90% fat and a small amount of protein. And so if you calculated it from the study, it was like 40 grams of protein for these kids.
Mm.
You need protein to grow, right? That's the primary fuel for growth is amino acids. And so, yes, they're going to have stunted growth. I mean, so if you do a protein focused ketogenic diet and, whole foods, it's absolutely great for kids. And we've helped tons of clients with their kids with ADHD and even autism, seeing
Mm-hmm.
big improvements with just diet.
Yeah. Wow. So I don't know how much more time you have. I do have a couple more questions. So
Yeah,
you
sure.
have okay.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I had seen you talk about elsewhere, long ago when I was much younger, I was working on my PhD in anthropology. So I've always been interested in human evolution and what is, the optimal proper human diet. So I was looking for those answers, even in
Yeah.
grad school. And I was grateful to find some information then, and certainly the science has evolved now. So what according to the anthropological data, what did early humans eat?
So that is really interesting. We talked about this in. Sorry, I'm just texting my boys to their dog and take care of her. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
in our carnivore book, we actually dug into this deeper. And
Mm-hmm.
even since the carnivore book, there's been more evidence that's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So, 50,000, 30,000 years ago in that range was a time when humans evolved into what we are today with big brains. The early Neanderthals, and then also early humans of that time were starting to develop and adapt. And what was happening during that time, they were growing these big brains and shrinking their guts. Um, Brain is an energy hog and it needs nutrients. And so to facilitate that change, swapping a big gut for a big brain, we had to go to really energy dense, nutritionally dense food. And what is one of the most nutrient dense foods you can get? It's animal protein. Is something that people don't, our keto book and then in the carnivore book, we expanded on this. Animal proteins have some of the most highest vitamins and minerals across the widest range of just about any food you can eat. And somehow we've lost that knowledge in our, you give somebody a steak and some broccoli, kale, and you ask them where the nutrients are coming from, they're going to be, probably the kale. Well, it's the beef. And you look at beef, it's just, that's just protein and fat. No, it's loaded with vitamins and minerals and the most bioavailable forms. And so that feeds the body and feeds this brain growth that we were doing in that evolutionary phase. Well, they've looked at that from an anthropological perspective where they do isotopic analysis of the nitrogen content in the collagen of the fossil bones. And what this tells you is the source of those nitrogen, so the source of the proteins that they ate. You can trace them back to certain plants or certain animals. You can even say what kind of animals they were eating. And study after study after study of those early humans showed that they were primarily carnivores. They ate, in our book, we have these charts of, different animals of that era, same era, and the nitrogen contents versus those humans. And humans were even higher apex carnivores than hyenas and lions of that time. And it was primarily woolly mammoths, large rhinoceroses, large herbivores. That's
so these for us today, is that like thinking about like an elephant, something that size?
Well, yeah, a woolly mammoth is I don't know how many times bigger than an elephant. So it's just massive.
Oh my God, I didn't know anything was bigger than an elephant. Okay.
Yeah, I can remember. I think it's at least twice as tall as an elephant or something. They're huge, huge animals.
Wow.
And what these early humans
so we got to be pretty. First of all, we just got to give a round of applause to early humans with a spear. Yes. And a whole lot of courage to take down an animal that's like 3 stories tall.
Yep. Well, guess what just came out? There was this pit that was found in Europe, and in it were tons of woolly mammoth bones. So what these early humans did is they dug a pit, then they would chase them into the pit. They'd fall into the pit, 1 or 2 of them, they'd kill them, and then eat off of them for months.
Right.
And also an indication of why our stomachs are the way they are. So if you look at stomach pH below 7 is more acidic. The lower it is, the more acidic it is. And if you look at different animal species, different tropic levels, there's things that just eat plants. Those type of animals are usually about 5 to 6 on the stomach pH. You look at omnivores that eat either plants or animals equally, they're about 4 to 5. 4 to 5. And then 2 to 3 is a typical carnivore, like a lion. So you're in the 2 to 3 range. Scavengers, like hyenas, they're usually about 1. Well, humans are like 1 to 2, usually around 1.5. So we're almost closer to scavengers even than lions, say. Well, why is that? These early humans. Think of a woolly mammoth. A cow, 1 cow, could feed 1 human for almost a year if you ate every part of it, right? You think about a woolly mammoth, that could feed a whole tribe for months. So they were eating off these animals, and they didn't have, they had primitive, smoking or different techniques that they might have used to preserve the meat were pretty primitive. So they were eating this as it turned, and that's why they have almost more of scavenger stomach pH, and we still do today.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's actually a lot of the problems that people have coming into carnivore is having a pH level that is too high, or the number is not as close to 1 as it should be, and so have a hard time digesting food. And so a lot of the advice that we give people is to have more salt, eat smaller meals, or also take HCl pills, and that can be helpful in getting it up until it gets to the point where you can do it.
Definitely. We've even had on the keto side, people come to us that were vegans for a long time. Mm-hmm. And they have to be very slow about bringing animal proteins back in because their stomach pH is so high, not down where it should be. And digestive enzymes can come into play too because they're just not producing the digestive enzymes like they should because they haven't eaten in so long. And so we add HCl, add digestive enzymes, like ox bile, and slowly, get back into that mode, right? And same thing can be true for carnivore. Even people coming with keto, they can take some transition time, and adding HCl and digestive enzymes can really help that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really like that you were able to help me sort of think about what a woolly mammoth looks like and how much food that is. Because I feel like at this point, there's sort of the way people sort of think about carnivore or think about animal eating, they think about us going out and every couple of days, expending energy to go and hunt an animal. But it's really not like that. I mean, if you're killing something the size of, an elephant or twice as big, that's food for weeks or months, and you're probably sharing it very broadly to make sure it gets eaten. And it also helped me to think about like how often we should be eating. For the people who are preparing the food, like if people are eating all day long, that makes so much work for those people preparing the food and dealing with it that, that just can't be. You just have to have like a set time and then, and then you got to stop, right?
Yeah. That's part of it. I think it's all context too in the times we live, right? Back then, they gorged themselves like crazy and they ate and they gained weight, right? Because they had to for the leaner winter months when they weren't, food wasn't as plentiful. So they went through these cycles of binging and then fasting and all of that. Today, we don't really have that, right? We have unlimited food supply whenever we want it, as long as your budget, can accommodate. And so that's where, looking at moderating those intakes and things can be important, especially again, if, fat loss is the goal. And in general, we don't really recommend longer fasts to people, especially, if the primary goal is fat loss.
What do you consider a longer fast?
Longer than 24 hours.
Okay.
One meal a day is, fine. We look at it as it's more important to get enough lean, to preserve your lean mass, so get enough protein for that. And then look at other strategies that can do that without, if you fast longer than 24 hours, you're going to start losing lean mass. Some of the best studies on this have shown that even if you start out keto adapted, you lose about a 1/4 pound of lean mass per day of water only fasting. And lean mass is, 1/4 pound of muscle. That's important, right? We don't want to lose that over time if we want to stay strong as we get older, like myself. But that's the thing is things like protein sparing modified fast can kind of hack that. It's protein sparing because it spares your lean mass because you get enough protein. So you get kind of your normal protein level, but then you have basically 0 carbs and then very low fat, like 30 grams of fat. So you're taking the fuels, carbs and fat, and cranking them way down. So you get some of the, a lot of the benefits of a longer fast without the negatives, which would be losing your lean mass. And that could be a real powerful tool.
So I definitely had tried a while back a protein sparing modified fast, and I found that it was terrible for my mood and my brain. Do you find that is to be the case, or?
In general, most of the clients that we have will say that they can't believe how full they are on it. They're eating like 600 calories. Like, I can't even eat it all. I can't even eat all the protein. Like, I'm full. So from that perspective, it's a kind of day where if a first day of a water only fast is kind of crappy too, because you have hunger issues and stuff. So I kind of look at it in that perspective. It's not necessarily I'm going to be totally satiated, and this is a tool that if you want to ramp up fat loss, if you want to break a stall, this is a good tool to use. We say do it a couple days in a week to speed up that, basically taking that fat flux and reducing the fat going in, right? And so more comes out and gets used as fuel. Um, you obviously don't have to do it, but we just look at it as it's better than a longer fast because you're going to preserve your lean mass and get nutrients, right? When you're not eating anything, you're not getting any vitamins and minerals, but your body always needs that turnover in the body of protein is significant. I mean, there was a recent article I was looking at that our BMR, our basal metabolic rate, that's how much energy your body uses just to live, right? Up to 20% of that is autophagy, just your cellular turnover. So it's autophagy is your body breaking down failing or old cells and making new ones. Also, generating new structures for skin and all your tissues in your body. The Nobel Prize winner for autophagy, with his calculations, he estimated that in 3 months we turn over all our cells. So you're basically a new person than you were 3 months ago.
Wow,
it's crazy.
That's good to know.
But autophagy needs protein. You need this protein. Amino acids are the fuel that runs that engine, and so that's why we look at it as just a better option than longer fasting.
Gotcha. Okay, that's really useful information, actually. So I do have a question. I can cut this out if you don't want to talk about it, but I'm curious about your experience having 2 boys who are African, and what that's like for you. I mean, that is a challenge, but I can edit this out if you don't want to.
Oh no, it's. I mean, first of all, they were an absolute blessing in our life. I mean, it's the whole process was just amazing. Going there, we went there to meet them. This was a really hard process for me to deal with, but we went there in like May or April of that year. We met them. We signed paperwork and basically became legally their parents in Ethiopia. We just had to wait for immigration to clear them to come home, and it was supposed to take maybe a month. It ended up taking 9 months. And so after meeting their children,
so you were there in Africa for 9 months?
No, we came back thinking that
okay.
we'd go back a month or 2 months to pick them up and bring them home. And it ended up being 9. And that was a hard summer, going through Kai's first birthday, missing that, Micah's second birthday. It was a rough 9 months. But imagine giving birth and you get to meet them, hold them for a week, and then they take them away and say, you can come back in 9 months and get them. I mean, it was that kind of heart-wrenching. We went back finally over Thanksgiving that year and brought them home. So our gotcha day is in a week and a half or so.
Congratulations.
Thank you. They're amazing. I mean, in the last few years, it's definitely opened up my eyes to what we still have to deal with. I mean, as I don't live this on a daily basis. They will have to. What the color of their skin is and what society, looks to them as. We've even seen it already in certain things, which is kind of shocking. I've been in a store where, my son's at the time, I think 8 years old. The store clerk, I won't say what ethnicity she was, but she followed him around as he's walking around the store. And I'm like, why are you following my kid? But those are the kind of things that we've seen, and we've been working really hard to educate ourselves and also our sons to know what they're gonna have to deal with in their life and what society is like, especially again in the last couple of years, what things we've seen. It's been a lot of really hard conversations, but I hope that over time we're going to give them the tools to be successful in this life, and having people like you or others, that can be influencers in their lives as well. We're trying to expose them to that as much as we can. But yeah, they're absolutely amazing. They're again, I think partly because they eat keto, they're the smartest kids I know. I mean, Micah's doing, algebra, and he's uh, just turned 11 years old. So he's super smart. Both of them are. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be the next few years, especially, are going to be uh, hard. I mean, as any father, African American father would know about his son in this age, when do they go from being cute and whatnot to a threat, which is going to be a tough time. But hopefully, we'll give them the tools they need.
And I'm sure there'll be a lot of joys as well.
Yeah,
It's
tons
not
of
all
joy.
bad.
It's all joys, but this
Mhm.
right now for me is my sort of inside thought process of what I'm going to have to prepare them with. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, you have a huge community to lean on, and there are definitely, supporters and people who, can be very helpful. So, yeah. So
yeah,
definitely don't hesitate to, to reach out where necessary.
thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, part of the reason why I wanted to create the Black Carnivore community is also to create a space where these kind of things can be talked about. There isn't an answer. There isn't an easy answer for how you deal with the, additional stress of race or racism. Or all the other things that that come from it, but being able to have a space where you can talk about it and know that you're not going to get gaslit, that people recognize the problems that exist is really helpful, and that is one way to reduce some of the stress. And so that's why I feel like we have a community where people are able to get that kind of support. And following a keto or carnivore diet, even though we're talking about diet, and it's like, a lot of people are like, it's food, what does that mean? Well, food is everything. I mean, culture, for human beings, like the things that are most common in life, food is something that we've cared about forever, and that is a lot of where our culture is carried. So when you make changes in the way that you eat, that is making a statement on what you learned from your grandmother, or what was passed down your family line, how you relate to other people in your family. Even the amount of time you spend in the kitchen can restrict how much communal time you have with the other women in the family. And so all of these things do actually get changed when you change the way you eat. And so you do need quite a bit of support, and that's what I try to provide. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. That's one of the things that support is so, like you said, so key when you change this, because we get people all the time that they don't have the support system, and it's so hard for them, and they fail. And I think that's amazing. And hopefully someday my sons will be part of your community.
I would love that. Yeah, definitely.
Great.
So I've kept you on really long, and I really appreciate your being so gracious about staying so long. Now, can you please tell us all the things that we should buy, order, watch, attend from you? How do we reach out to you if we have questions? Like, what's the story?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on, and it's been an awesome talk. And I would start out by saying, mariamindbodyhealth.com is our blog, and there's tons of free information, tons of free recipes out there. So I encourage everyone to go check that out. We have a YouTube channel where Maria's always putting out recipes and videos. And then social media, it's usually Maria Emmerich or Craig Emmerich. On Facebook, we also have a keto group, and we have a carnivore group, and then we have our keto adapted is a page. That's like your business page or whatever. But our books, we have a carnivore book and a keto book, which are both great, I think. We co-authored those. I think it's a great partnership when we do that. And so I think that's about it. Yeah.
Wow. And you actually, noticed, well, you've had this seminar that's been going on.
Oh,
Um,
yes. So we're actually if this is after it completes it's like a 3 month thing where we're kind of rolling all this out. We're going to have this packaged as something that people can watch. So they're all videos, including the live Q&As we're doing. We're recording them and putting them in there. After it's done, we're going to sell that as a like $25 or $30 to get all that content. And so that'll be available. And there's tons of great, awesome interviews in there, tons of great presentations in science. So that'll be a great resource too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really an amazing resource. So anybody watching, you should definitely check it out. I feel like it feels harder for me to find scientific presentations than it was a couple of years ago. When I first started like getting into keto, like I was always looking for information. So I was finding like some ancestral health, conference of Boulder, and they'd have some guy who's giving a paper. But I feel like it's a little bit harder to find that stuff now. I don't know why. So,
Yeah, no,
your conference was really like the first thing I've seen in a while where there's like fresh new science being presented.
thank you. I appreciate that. And one of the things we did in too was after the presentation, the next content in the series was all the supporting materials. So I wanted to make sure that, some of these, there's like 75 different studies that are referenced in the presentation, and I linked to all the studies, so you can go and read the studies yourself if you want to dig into them deeper. So we want to make sure it was very science-based and that science focus.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. That is quite a resource. Just being able to look through the footnotes is a big deal.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And and so I noticed you're also doing a coaching course. So for anybody who's interested in becoming a keto or a carnivore coach, you also have that. So that's pretty impressive.
Thanks. Yeah, we started that a couple years ago. We train people how to follow the science and do. It started again about 2-3 years ago. We saw this trend of this kind of bad information out there when keto got popular. So we wanted to make sure that if people are out there pushing this message, they're doing the right science-based kind of message. And that's why we started this program for coaches to be trained and certified as a keto and carnivore coach now too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so people should just go to the website and look for that info.
Yep. And a lot of that is on, so Maria Mind Body Health, you can get to there from the blog, which is Maria Mind Body Health is the blog. But a lot of this stuff that we're talking about is on, like the conference and everything is on keto-adapted.com. That's kind of our support and, website for all of our content that we deliver.
Yeah. My God, you guys produce a ton of content.
Yeah.
I can barely keep up with my stuff.
Yeah, it's a full-time job. There's no off days around here. But
Yeah. Wow. So, that's you've exhausted my questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience?
I just want to thank you very much for having me on. It's been a great talk.